Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Cassian Vance adjusted the collar of his suit, already regretting accepting the invitation. The grand hall of the HFY Dominion's palace shimmered with golden light, casting long shadows on the towering pillars. Alien diplomats and warlords filled the space, their voices a deep hum of power and tradition. Cassian wasn't here for the politics. He was a Terran engineer, a businessman selling high-tech energy shields. If he played his cards right, he'd leave this planet with the biggest contract of his life. But first, he had to survive the night. A sharp voice broke through his thoughts. "You are the Terran?" Cassian turned, facing her, the queen of the HFY Dominion, Queen Syra Dureketh. She stood tall, her presence commanding the room without effort. She didn't need a crown to prove her authority. The way the warlord stepped back when she walked said everything. Cassian gave a polite bow. "Cassian Vance, at your service." Zyra's eyes narrowed. "You are smaller than I expected." Cassian smirked. "And you're more charming than I expected." Silence. Then, a flicker of amusement in her gaze. "I do not have time for weak humor," she said, though her lips twitched slightly. "You claim your Terran shields are superior to ours." Cassian held up a small device, pressing a button. A shimmering blue barrier formed in front of him. "Test it," he offered. Zyra raised an eyebrow. Without warning, she drew a plasma pistol and fired. The blast hit the shield, absorbed instantly. The energy rippled, then dissipated. Cassian stood unharmed. The room fell silent. Zyra's expression remained unreadable. "Interesting." Cassian let out a breath. "That was your idea of a test shot." "I expected it to fail," she admitted. He laughed. "Great. Nothing like a near-death experience to break the ice." Before Zyra could respond, a sudden blast shook the palace. Screams erupted. The golden walls flashed red with alarm lights. The HFY warlords drew weapons, forming a defensive line around the queen. Cassian spun, spotting masked figures bursting through the entrance. Assassins. A plasma rifle fired, a direct shot aimed at Zyra. Cassian didn't think. He lunged, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her out of the way. The blast hit him instead. The force knocked him back. He hit the marble floor, gasping. His prototype vest had absorbed the shot, but the impact still hurt like hell. The warlords roared, charging into battle. Zyra moved fast, drawing a curved blade and slicing through one of the attackers in a single motion. The room became a blur of combat. Flashes of energy fire, the clash of steel, the scent of burning fabric. Cassian groaned, pushing himself up. Zyra was already fighting off 3 assassins, her movements fierce and precise. He forced himself to stand, pulling out his own compact shield generator. One of the assassins turned to him. Cassian activated his shield just as the attacker lunged. The energy barrier flared, repelling the strike. But Cassian wasn't a warrior. He dodged, using his smaller frame to move faster. He needed to think. Spying a fallen enemy weapon, he grabbed it. The alien rifle felt heavier than expected, but he aimed at the ceiling and fired. The blast collapsed a chandelier, sending debris crashing down, separating the assassins from the queen. Zyra turned, eyes locking onto him. For a moment, she just stared. Then, the last assassin fell. Silence returned. Cassian exhaled. "Well," he muttered, "I didn't die. That's a win." Before he could fully process what happened, the warlords surrounded him, but not as rescuers. They were glaring. One of them growled, "You took the blow for the queen." Cassian frowned. "Yeah, you're welcome." Zyra stepped forward, expression unreadable. Then, in a slow, deliberate voice, she said, "You just made yourself my husband." Cassian blinked. "Wait, what?" Cassian stared at Queen Kyra, hoping he had misheard. "Husband," he repeated. "As in, married." The HFY warlords stood around them, watching in stone-cold silence. Cassian wasn't sure if they were impressed or seconds away from chopping him into pieces. Zyra crossed her arms. "You took a lethal shot for me. Among the HFY, this is a warrior's vow, an act of ultimate devotion." Cassian rubbed his forehead. That wasn't devotion. That was instinct. A warlord snorted. Instinct or not, it is law. Cassian turned back to Xyra. You're a queen. Surely you can override this. Xyra's gaze didn't waver. Tradition is absolute. Cassian exhaled, trying to think. He was a Terran businessman, not a warrior king. He knew nothing about ruling an alien empire, or surviving one. All right, he said carefully. Let's say we ignore this whole marriage thing. You cannot. Sure I can. I'm from Earth, where we have this thing called consent. Xyra's lips twitched slightly. Then you consented when you threw yourself into danger for me. Cassian was about to argue when a deep voice rumbled behind him. I challenged the Terran. Cassian turned. A towering Zikari warlord stepped forward, his armor glinting under the hall's golden lights. His sharp eyes were fixed on Cassian like he was nothing more than an insect. Xyra's expression darkened. Warlord Varric, stand down. Varric ignored her. If this off-worlder is to be your consort, let him prove his worth, or let me take his place. Cassian's stomach dropped. Wait, take my place. Xyra turned to him. Among the Zikari, a marriage can be challenged in combat. Cassian paled. Great, love that. Just one problem. I don't fight. Varric grinned. Then this will be quick. The crowd murmured in anticipation. Cassian felt trapped. He wasn't a coward, but facing off against an alien warrior built like a battle tank, that was just suicide. Xyra watched him closely, her expression unreadable. Then, after a pause, she spoke. The Terran will not fight in the traditional way. The murmurs grew louder. Varric scowled. What do you mean? Xyra tilted her head. Cassian is not a warrior, but he is a strategist. He will win by wit. Cassian blinked. I will. Xyra didn't look at him. Yes. Before he could protest, she turned to Varric. A trial of skill, a contest of minds. Varric growled. A warrior's strength is his honor. Strength means nothing without intelligence. Xyra countered. Or are you afraid to lose? The gathered warlords rumbled in approval. Varric's jaw tightened. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. Fine. A challenge of minds. Cassian exhaled in relief. At least he wouldn't die in a sword fight. But then he realized something. He had no idea what kind of challenge this was. The challenge. An hour later, Cassian found himself standing in a massive, dimly lit chamber. The room smelled of burning embers and something metallic. The warlords stood in a circle, watching in silence. In the center of the room was a large, circular table, and on it, a holographic war simulation. Cassian swallowed hard. It was a battlefield strategy test. Varric stood across from him, his eyes gleaming with confidence. We each command an army, he said. First to conquer the other's capital wins. Cassian hesitated. He had zero military experience. But strategy games, those he could handle. He took a deep breath. All right, time to cheat the system. The battle begins. Varric played aggressively, sending waves of warships and ground forces straight toward Cassian's capital. It was a traditional Zikari tactic, overwhelming force, brutal, relentless. Cassian, he played dirty. Instead of defending, he retreated. He let Varric advance, abandoning territory, making it look like he was losing. The warlords muttered. Some laughed. But Cassian had a plan. He used his lost ground as a trap. Varric's forces rushed in, only to find themselves bottlenecked. Cassian then cut off supply lines, starved the enemy fleet, and launched surprise attacks from behind. Varric's forces collapsed. The warlords fell silent. Cassian leaned back, grinning. Checkmate. Victory and the Queen's decision. Varric clenched his fists, seething. But he couldn't argue. The game had spoken. Xyra stood. The challenge is decided. Cassian Vance remains my consort. Cassian exhaled, relieved. But as he turned to Xyra, she met his gaze with an intensity that made his breath hitch. Your mind is sharper than I expected, she murmured. Cassian smirked. And you're more fun than I expected. Xyra raised an eyebrow. Fun. Cassian shrugged. Hey, if I'm stuck being your husband, we might as well make it interesting. For a moment, there was silence. Then, to his shock, Syra laughed. A low, dangerous, yet amused laugh. Cassian wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a terrifying thing. Either way, he was in deep. Cassian sat in the Queen's private starship, staring at the gleaming black walls and expensive decor. It was a sharp contrast to the chaos of the last few hours. He had survived an assassination attempt, an accidental marriage, and a battle of wits against a warlord. Now, he was sitting across from his new wife, Queen Syra, as the ship carried them to her palace. And he still had no idea how any of this happened. So, Cassian said, drumming his fingers on the armrest, "What's the plan?" Syra tilted her head slightly. "Plan? You know, for us." He gestured vaguely, "because right now, this whole husband situation feels like a huge misunderstanding." Syra leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table between them. "There is no misunderstanding, Cassian Vance. You have bound yourself to me by the laws of the Zikari. There is no undoing it." Cassian let out a low groan. "That's really not how things work where I'm from." Syra's lips twitched. "Then it is fortunate that we are not on your world." Cassian sighed. "Okay, fine. Let's assume I'm stuck in this. What exactly do you expect from me?" Syra's golden eyes gleamed. "Loyalty." Cassian frowned. "You're a warrior queen. You don't need a random Terran engineer at your side." Syra studied him in silence, then said, "You are not just an engineer. You are clever. You think differently. You took a laser blast meant for me, then defeated one of my greatest warlords in strategy. That is more than most have done." Cassian rubbed his face. "Yeah, but that was luck." Syra leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Was it?" Cassian hesitated. She was looking at him like she could see straight through him. It was unsettling. He exhaled. "Okay, let's say I actually tried to do this. What does being the Queen's consort mean, exactly?" Syra straightened. "You will stand beside me in court. You will be respected, protected, and feared as my mate." Cassian raised a brow. "Feared?" She gave a small smirk. "You have already humiliated Warlord Varric. They will tread carefully." Cassian snorted. "Right, because I'm so terrifying." Syra's smirk didn't fade. "You are more dangerous than you appear." Cassian wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Before he could respond, the ship shook violently, the alarms blared, and the pilot's voice crackled through the comms. "Your Majesty, we are under attack." Cassian tensed. "Oh, come on, again." Syra was already on her feet. "Prepare for evasive action." The ship lurched as enemy fire struck its shields. Cassian stumbled, grabbing onto the nearest surface. He turned to Syra. "Who the hell is attacking us?" Her jaw clenched. "The bloodborne raiders. They have long sought to challenge my rule." Cassian groaned. "Fantastic." Syra pressed a button on the wall. "Shields to maximum. Ready the plasma cannons." The ship's gunners fired back, bright blue energy blasts tearing through space, but the bloodborne ships were fast, dodging effortlessly. Cassian's mind raced. He was no fighter, but he was a problem solver. He rushed to the navigation console, scanning their surroundings. "They're too fast," he muttered. "We need an edge." His eyes landed on a massive asteroid field nearby. Cassian turned to Syra. "Can your pilot fly through that?" Syra followed his gaze, then smirked. "Yes, but it will be risky." Cassian grinned. "Good, because they're bigger than us, and bigger ships don't turn as fast." Syra's eyes flashed with approval. "Pilot, take us into the asteroids." The ship veered hard, diving into the rocky terrain. The bloodborne ships followed, but as Cassian predicted, their larger size made them struggle to maneuver. Syra's gunner fired, and one of the enemy ships collided with a jagged rock, exploding in a burst of flame. Cassian whooped. "Now that's teamwork." Syra turned to him, expression unreadable. Then, to his shock, she nodded in approval. The remaining bloodborne ships hesitated, then retreated. The battle was over. Cassian exhaled. "Well, that was a fun first day of marriage." Syra chuckled, a low, rich sound that made Cassian's breath catch. "You continue to surprise me, Cassian Vance." He smirked. That's kind of my thing. Zyra held his gaze for a moment longer, then she stepped past him, her voice calm yet firm. Come, we have much to discuss. Cassian ran a hand through his hair. This was going to be one hell of a marriage. Cassian stared at the enormous palace doors as they creaked open before him. The grand halls of the Zikari royal fortress were unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering pillars lined the golden floors, glowing crimson torches casting long shadows across the walls. Armed guards stood at attention, their sharp gazes locked on him. The air buzzed with an unspoken challenge. Cassian leaned toward Zyra. So, just checking, do any of these guys want me dead? Zyra barely glanced at him. Many. Cassian winced. Fantastic. Zyra walked forward, her presence commanding. They do not know what to make of you yet. You are an outsider, and you embarrassed one of our strongest warlords. Cassian exhaled. That was kind of an accident. Zyra's lips twitched. Perhaps, but accidents shape history. Cassian wasn't sure if that was inspiring or terrifying. As they entered the main chamber, the assembled nobles and generals turned to face them. A tall, broad-shouldered Zikari stepped forward, his expression cold. Queen Zyra. His voice was deep, his tone formal. You return with him. His eyes flicked to Cassian with thinly veiled disdain. Zyra's gaze was unreadable. Chancellor Orvik. Orvik's sharp eyes narrowed. Forgive my bluntness, but how can a Terran engineer be worthy of standing at your side? Cassian sighed. Man, you guys really know how to make a guy feel welcome. A few warriors chuckled under their breath. Orvik, however, was unimpressed. Zyra folded her arms. Cassian Vance has proven his worth already. Orvik scoffed. By trickery, not strength. Cassian crossed his arms. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you rather I had punched my way through a warlord? Because that seems like a pretty bad life choice. More laughter, this time, louder. Orvik scowled. You mock our ways. Cassian shrugged. Not mocking. Just pointing out that I use my brain, not my fists. Zyra tilted her head. Then prove it again. Cassian blinked. Wait, what? Zyra stepped forward. You wish to earn their respect, then you must outthink them once more. Orvik's eyes gleamed. An excellent idea. Let us see if the Terran's wit is more than luck. Cassian groaned. Why do I feel like I'm about to regret this? The test. A large stone board was brought forward, placed in the center of the chamber. On it was a complex battle map, a recreation of an ancient Zikari war. Cassian squinted at it. Oh, it's a war puzzle. Orvik smirked. It is a test of command. You must break through my forces and claim the capital. If you fail, you will be seen as unworthy. Cassian muttered. No pressure. Zyra stood beside him, her voice low. The battle before you is one that was never won. It is a famous lesson in our history. Cassian raised a brow. Never won. Zyra's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Prove history wrong. Cassian sighed. Great. Orvik made the first move, placing heavy forces along the front line, blocking any direct assault. His troops were positioned in a perfect defensive wall. Cassian studied the map. Attacking head-on, impossible. Flanking, anticipated. Traps, expected. His mind raced. How do you beat a war that was never won? Then he noticed something. The simulation assumed both sides were playing by the same rules. Cassian grinned. But I don't follow rules. He moved his pieces backward. The crowd murmured in confusion. Orvik frowned. You retreat. Cassian shrugged. Nah, I just don't fight fair. He spread his forces wide, abandoning the idea of a traditional army. Instead, he turned his units into small, fast-moving strike teams. Instead of attacking the front, they slipped through weak points, cutting off supplies, disrupting reinforcements, and hitting where the enemy least expected. Orvik's forces crumbled. The battle, thought to be unwinnable, was suddenly over. Cassian leaned back. Ha, that was fun. Silence. Then, laughter. Deep, appreciative laughter from some of the older warlords. Even Orvik looked stunned. Zyra gave him a slow nod. You continue to surprise, Cassian Vance. Cashin smirked. Yeah, I get that a lot. A shift in the air. As the court dispersed, Cashin followed Xyra through the halls. He could feel the difference now. The warriors no longer looked at him as a joke. They were watching him with curiosity, maybe even respect. Cashin glanced at Xyra. You planned this, didn't you? Xyra didn't deny it. You needed to prove yourself. Now they will hesitate before underestimating you. Cashin huffed. You know, most wives don't throw their husbands into strategy battles on their first day of marriage. Xyra gave him a sideways glance. Most husbands do not complain after winning. Cashin chuckled. Touché. They stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. Cashin stood in the middle of the royal training grounds, surrounded by warriors twice his size. He let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. This is a bad idea, he muttered. Xyra, standing at the edge of the arena, crossed her arms. You must learn to fight in our ways, Cashin. Cashin huffed. I prefer not fighting. A warrior across from him smirked. Then you will lose quickly. Cashin eyed the massive training weapons in front of him. Long staffs, curved blades, and heavy gauntlets. He was not built for this. He had barely survived yesterday's strategy match, and now they wanted him to fight. Xyra tossed him a short staff. Begin. Cashin barely had time to react before the warrior charged. With a grunt, Cashin rolled to the side, barely avoiding a strike that would have knocked him flat. The warrior was fast, too fast. Cashin tried swinging the staff, but his opponent dodged effortlessly, grinning. Cashin backed up, raising his free hand. Can we talk about this? The warrior lunged. Cashin ducked at the last second, the attack whooshing over his head. He instinctively kicked the warrior's knee, throwing him off balance. The warrior stumbled, just enough for Cashin to smack him in the side with the staff. The crowd murmured. Xyra raised a brow. Not bad. Cashin let out a breath. I'm still alive, so I'll take that as a win. But his moment of relief didn't last. Another warrior stepped forward, this one even bigger. Cashin sighed. Of course. Fight smarter, not harder. The second warrior didn't wait. He swung the massive training blade at Cashin, forcing him to dodge wildly. Cashin barely kept up. His heart pounded as he blocked and sidestepped, but the attacks kept coming. His arms ached from deflecting the force of each strike. Then he noticed something. The warrior always overcommitted to his swings. Cashin grinned. All right, big guy, let's see if you like physics. The warrior lunged forward with a powerful strike. Instead of blocking, Cashin sidestepped at the last second, letting the warrior's own momentum carry him too far forward. Cashin tripped him. The warrior went crashing to the ground. Silence. Then, a few warriors laughed. Xyra nodded, pleased. You learn quickly. Cashin, still panting, leaned on his staff. Yeah, I also learned that I hate this. A private conversation. After training, Cashin and Xyra walked through the royal gardens. The scent of alien flowers filled the air, and the soft hum of distant waterfalls echoed through the space. Cashin rubbed his sore arms. So, do I have to fight your entire army, or was that just a warm-up? Xyra gave him a side glance. Only the worthy may stand beside me. You must earn your place. Cashin sighed. You know, most people just go on a couple of dates first. Xyra smirked. Zikari do not waste time with such games. Cashin chuckled. Yeah, I noticed. For a moment, there was a pause between them. The usual sharpness in Xyra's expression softened, just slightly. Cashin hesitated, then asked, Why did you let me stay? Xyra's gaze flickered. You intrigue me. Cashin raised a brow. Because I fight dirty? Xyra shook her head. Because you do not break. Cashin wasn't sure how to respond to that. They continued walking, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Cashin exhaled. This was getting complicated. Cashin stood in front of a towering ceremonial hall, feeling very out of place. The Zikari royal court had invited him to a formal gathering, and that usually meant one of two things. Either they were warming up to him, or they were about to publicly embarrass him. Xyra stood beside him, her expression unreadable. She looked completely at ease. Cashin, not so much. So, Cashin said, adjusting the stiff ceremonial sash draped over his shoulder. This isn't secretly an execution, right? Zera almost smiled. No, but do not embarrass yourself. Cashin sighed. Fantastic. No pressure. The doors swung open, revealing a grand banquet hall filled with warriors, nobles, and alien diplomats. The air was thick with the scent of spiced meats and exotic fruits, and the hum of conversation filled the vast chamber. Cashin could feel hundreds of eyes on him. He whispered to Xyra, "Everyone's staring at me." "They are curious," she replied. "A Terran standing among warriors is unusual." Cashin forced a relaxed grin. "Well, let's give them a show, shall we?" The warriors' toast. Cashin and Xyra were led to a central table where high-ranking warriors and officials sat. Large goblets of a strong blue-hued drink were placed in front of them. Chancellor Orvik, the same man Cashin had outwitted during the strategy test, stood up and raised his cup, a toast to Queen Xyra and her unexpected consort. Cashin raised a brow. "Unexpected? You make me sound like an accident." A few warriors chuckled. Orvik did not. Orvik continued, his tone pointed. "Among the Zukari, a warrior's worth is proven through battle. Tonight, we honor our strength and see if our guest is truly worthy." Cashin felt something shift in the air. Zera stiffened beside him. Cashin leaned toward her. "I don't like that tone. That was a something's about to happen tone." She sighed. "They challenge you." Cashin blinked. "Challenge me? I already fought 2 guys today." Zera met his gaze. "This is different." Before Cashin could argue, a warrior across the table slammed his goblet down. "The Terran must drink the warrior's cup if he wishes to remain in our queen's presence." Cashin eyed the blue liquid. "And what exactly happens if I drink this?" Another warrior smirked. "You either hold it or you fall." Cashin glanced at Xyra. "Tell me this isn't poison." "It is not," she said, but there was something in her voice. Cashin sighed. "That's not exactly comforting. A dangerous drink." Cashin lifted the goblet and took a cautious sip. His eyes widened. The drink burned like liquid fire, sending a shock through his system. His fingers went numb for a second, and he swore he felt his heart race. The warriors watched closely. Cashin exhaled slowly. "All right, that's strong." A warrior grinned. "Finish it." Cashin groaned. "Of course." He lifted the goblet again and downed the rest in one go. The burn spread through his chest, but he kept his expression calm. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the room erupted in cheers. Warriors pounded their fists on the table, laughing and nodding in approval. Even Orvik gave a reluctant smirk. Cashin set his cup down and exhaled. "All right, that was horrible. Someone get me water." Xyra leaned closer, her voice low with amusement. "You handled that well." Cashin smirked to spite himself. "Yeah, what's my prize?" Xyra studied him for a moment, then simply said, "You get to keep your dignity." Cashin laughed. "Wow, what a reward." But as the celebration continued, Cashin realized something. He was no longer just the outsider. For the first time, the warriors saw him as one of their own. Cashin woke up with a pounding headache and a strong suspicion that the Zukari drink he had consumed last night was not meant for humans. He groaned, sitting up in the massive bed inside his assigned royal chamber. The walls were carved with intricate alien patterns, and soft sunlight filtered through the high windows. Everything was luxurious, but right now, all he wanted was a glass of water and maybe some painkillers. A deep voice interrupted his thoughts. "You survived the warrior's cup." Cashin turned and saw Commander Vorik, one of the highest-ranking Zukari generals, standing in the doorway. His gold-trimmed armor gleamed under the morning light. Cashin let out a tired sigh. "Barely. Are you here to congratulate me or throw me into another fight?" Vorik chuckled. "Neither. I am here because the High Council has made a decision." Cashin rubbed his temples. "Please tell me it's a good one." Vorik stepped closer, his expression serious. "They have accepted you as a potential consort to Queen Kyra." Cashin froze. "Wait. What?" A sudden announcement. Cashin barely had time to process Vorik's words before he was summoned to the royal hall. The chamber was packed with Zikari warriors, nobles, and officials. At the far end, seated on an elevated throne, was Kyra, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Chancellor Orvik stood beside her, looking far too pleased with himself. "The High Council has spoken," Orvik announced, his voice echoing across the chamber. "Cashin Holt of Earth has proven his worth in combat, strategy, and tradition. He shall stand as a formal consort to our queen, if he chooses." Cashin's stomach dropped. He glanced at Syra, searching her face for any sign of surprise or protest, but she remained still, her gaze locked onto him. Cashin cleared his throat. "Okay, hold on. Nobody told me we were jumping straight to royal marriage." Some warriors laughed, but Orvik remained stern. "The bond is not immediate. You may challenge it. Through combat, of course." Cashin sighed. "Of course." Orvik smirked. "Or you may accept and take your rightful place at the queen's side." Cashin ran a hand through his hair. He was in way over his head. A private conversation. Later, Cashin and Zyra walked through the royal gardens, away from the prying eyes of the court. Cashin exhaled. "So this is happening." Zyra remained silent. He glanced at her. "You don't seem surprised." "I knew the council would push for it," she admitted. "Your survival impressed them." Cashin chuckled dryly. "Great, I impressed a bunch of warriors by not dying." Zyra finally turned to face him. "You are more than that." Cashin's breath caught at the intensity in her gaze. For the first time, there was no challenge, no teasing, just something unspoken between them. He swallowed. "What do you want, Syra?" She hesitated, then said, "I do not wish to be forced into a bond, but if I must choose someone, I would rather it be someone who understands me." Cashin's heart skipped a beat. A choice. Not just for him, but for her too. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. "So, what do we do?" Zyra's lips curled into the smallest smile. "We fight." Cashin stood in the center of the royal combat arena, facing Zyra. The crowd roared in anticipation. Warriors and nobles gathered to witness the most unusual trial in Zikari history. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. "All right, let's get this straight. If I win, I get to choose." Zyra nodded, her gaze locked onto him. "Yes, if you defeat me, you may refuse the bond." Cashin frowned. "And if I lose?" Zyra smirked. "Then you stand as my consort." Cashin sighed. "So either I get beaten up, or I win and look like a coward for running away." Zyra tilted her head. "Then fight well, Cashin Holt." A gong echoed through the arena. The duel began. Strength versus strategy. Cashin dodged as Zyra lunged at him, her movements impossibly fast. He barely had time to react before she swung her blunted training sword, aiming for his ribs. He rolled to the side, barely avoiding the hit. Okay, so we're not holding back, huh?" Zyra didn't respond. She pressed forward, her strikes relentless. Cashin blocked clumsily, his arms aching with every impact. She was too strong, too skilled. He couldn't beat her with brute force. So he wouldn't try. As Zyra lunged again, Cashin waited until the last second, then sidestepped and grabbed her wrist, using her momentum to pull her forward. For the first time, she stumbled. The crowd gasped. Cashin grinned. "Gotcha." The Zyra recovered instantly, spinning to face him. A glint of amusement flickered in her eyes. She enjoyed the challenge. The final move. For several long minutes, the fight continued. Cashin dodging, countering, using every ounce of his speed and wit to stay in the match. But Zyra was relentless. Eventually, Cashin found himself backed against the arena wall, sweat dripping down his brow. Zyra stood before him, sword raised. Yield. Cashin breathed hard, heart pounding. This was it. He could surrender, walk away, return to his old life. But did he want to? He looked at Zyra, fierce, strong, unwavering. She had never doubted herself. Cashin exhaled, then smirked. Instead of surrendering, he stepped forward, close enough that Zyra's sword nearly touched his chest. The crowd gasped. Zyra's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" Cassian's smirk widened. "Something really, really stupid." Then he dropped his sword. The arena fell silent. Zyra's grip on her weapon tightened. "You surrender." Cassian shook his head. "No." He met her gaze, voice steady. "I choose you." A flicker of surprise crossed Zyra's face. Then, just for a moment, her expression softened. The crowd erupted in cheers. A future together. Later that night, as the celebrations began, Cassian stood on a high balcony overlooking the city. He felt Zyra's presence before she spoke. "You fought well," she said. Cassian chuckled. "I lost." Zyra stepped beside him. "You chose." He turned to face her. "You weren't going to force me, were you?" Zyra hesitated, then shook her head. "No." Cassian grinned. "Good, because if we're doing this, I want it to be real." Zyra studied him for a long moment. Then, in a rare moment of openness, she said, "Then let it be real." Cassian smiled. For once, he had no regrets.